قل هذه سبيلي أدعو إلى الله على بصيرة أنا ومن اتبعني وسبحان الله وما أنا من المشركين.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد, I welcome all of the honorable listeners back to this series of lectures in which we are presenting a brief overview over the Ahle-Hadith Salafi Dawah in the Indo-Pak subcontinent and the efforts of the Ahle-Hadith to the Muslims and the regions of the Indo-Pak subcontinent and that which has spread from it all over the world. And we had started our discussion in our previous classes with the scholars who came from the 4th century after the Hijrah until the 12th century, in which they either followed the methodology, the madhab, the manhaj of the Ahle-Hadith, or they had inclinations towards the Ahle-Hadith madhab and they aided the Ahle-Hadith and their positions in various matters pertaining to the religion of Islam. And today we will conclude these series of scholars with the reviver of the sciences of Islam and the one who laid the foundation for the call to the Quran and the Sunnah in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, the great reviver Imam Shah Waliullah Dahlawi. Imam Shah Waliullah Dahlawi. And Imam Shah Waliullah Dahlawi, then he is someone that is considered a reviver of the Indo-Pak subcontinent near all of the groups and factions that exist in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, from the Ahle-Hadith and all of the various groups and factions of the Hanafis, the Ahlul Rai, from the Deobandis and the Barelvis and Jamaat Islami and other than them, then all of them consider him to be the foremost reviver of Islam in the Indo-Pak subcontinent in the latter centuries. And they all claim ascription to him, and they all claim that they are from the branches of the tree, the foundation that Shah Waliullah Dahlawi established in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. Then his sons and his grandsons, then his students and their students, they carried forward. And he was born, Shah Waliullah Dahlawi, in the year 1114 after the Hijrah, and he is Faruqi in lineage. His father's side is from the lineage of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, who are known as Faruqi, from Umar Faruq. And his mother's side is Sayyid Husseini, from the lineage of Hussein ibn Ali bin Abi Talib radiallahu anhuma. And in the young age of 5 years of age, he started to seek knowledge, and at the young tender age of 7 years, he had completed memorizing the Quran in totality. And he started then studying some of the introductory books in Arabic language and fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, upon his father, who was also a scholar of his time, Shah Abdul Rahim. And then when he was 17 years of age, his father passed away. So he took his place in the halaqah, the gathering of knowledge in Delhi that his father had. He took his place teaching the people and the students of knowledge, and for almost 12 years he taught all of the major sciences of Islam, all of the major branches of Islam, from the sciences of creed and tafsir and hadith and fiqh and usul al-fiqh and seerah and other than it. And he gained mastery, proficiency by way of teaching these sciences day and night for a period of 12 years, especially the science of fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, and usul al-fiqh, the principles of Islamic jurisprudence. And he studied all of the madhahib that were prevalent in the Muslim world, and their sources and books were found in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, from the Hanafi madhab, which was the dominant and is the dominant madhab in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, and the Shafi'i in the Maliki madhab. He studied the sources and the books of these madhahib in great detail, in great detail, and he understood their principles and their foundations in great detail. And this 12 years of study in great detail of these madhahib and its principles and foundations, it led him to the path of the fuqaha al-muhaddithin, the methodology of the Ahle-Hadith in fiqh and jurisprudence, which is to go with the proof, the authentic proof of the Quran and the Sunnah wherever it leads them, without confining, restricting to a madhab and having fanaticism, extremism to it, or blind following an imam from the imams, and taking the correct position from whoever it is found from the imams and the madhahib that is in agreement with the Quran and the Sunnah. And then in the year 1143 after the Hijrah, he made the intention to perform Hajj, and he traveled to Hijaz, Mecca and Medina, which was from the foremost of the centers of knowledge in those times. And he stayed in Hijaz, in Mecca and Medina, for almost 1.5 years. In this journey, he stayed for 1.5 years, and in Hijaz he learned and gained mastery and proficiency in Hadith and his sciences. And his methodology of following the Ahle-Hadith and their madhab, it became even more firm and stronger with proofs in Hijaz. So in Medina, he sought knowledge from the major scholars of Hadith and the Ahle-Hadith in those times, such as Allama Muhammad Hayat Sindhi, rahimahullah, whose biography has preceded yesterday, who was the Musnid of Medina, the foremost scholar of Hadith in Al-Masjid al-Nabawi in Medina in those times. And he also studied from other major scholars of Hadith, such as Sheikh Abu Tahir Kurdi and other than them. And before this, he had studied Hadith from Sheikh Muhammad Afdal Sialkoti in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, and then completed his studies in Hijaz. After he returned from this journey of Hajj and of seeking knowledge in the Haramain, Mecca and Medina, then his mastery and proficiency and understanding of the science of Islam, it even increased many folds. And the students of knowledge from all over India, Indo-Pak subcontinent, all over the world, they traveled to him to seek knowledge from this great scholar who had taken up and returned as residents to Delhi, the seat of Islamic rule in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. And his mission, Shah Waliullah Dehlawi, he deemed his life mission to return the Muslims in the Indo-Pak subcontinent back to the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah, and to attach them back with the two sources of revelation, the Quran and the Sunnah, and to exit them and awaken them from their ignorance and their fanatism, extremism towards the Hanafi madhab and blind following of Imam Abu Hanifa. His life mission was to exit them and connect them directly to the teachings and the guidance of the Quran and the Sunnah. And it was this goal of his and this zeal of his that led him to translate the first translation of the Quran in the Indo-Pak subcontinent into other than the Arabic language, that he translated the Quran into the language of the people of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, at that time the language of knowledge, the language of the scholars of Islam, which was Farsi, which was Persian language. He translated the Quran into the Persian language in his book Fathur Rahman. Fathur Rahman, this was the first translation in the Indo-Pak subcontinent of the Quran into the language of the people, so that they could read the Quran and understand it and implement it and apply its teachings and seek guidance from it. Until this time, Quran had been restricted to a book of blessings, barakah, which the Muslims would read in gatherings when someone died, and would keep above their heads at the highest place in their houses. And that was all they thought of the Quran, that it was a book of blessing. But Shah Waliullah Dehlawi, his mission was to return the Muslims to the teachings of the Quran. So he translated it in the language that they could understand, that they could read and understand and implement. And the scholars of evil in his time, they severely opposed him regarding this matter of translating the Quran into other than the Arabic language. and some of them even make takfir of him, deemed him to be a disbeliever who has exited the fold of Islam due to this effort of his, but he was persistent in his goal and life mission of continuing upon this path, calling the Muslims back and allowing them to benefit directly from the Quran and the Sunnah. He wrote a great book for the students of knowledge in understanding the teachings of the ayat of the Quran in the science of tafsir. That is the book Al-Fawz Al-Kabir. Al-Fawz Al-Kabir that he wrote in the Arabic language, in which he presented the science of Ulum al-Quran and Tafsir, which is considered one of the best books, one of the best and vast books that has been written in the science that would allow the students of knowledge to apply the principles of the Salaf in deriving rulings from the ayat of the Quran and all those sciences that are pertaining to the Quran. He also called the Muslims back to the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he focused his attention to the great book Muwatta Malik, Al-Muwatta of Imam Malik, which majority of his ahadith, then they are found in the Sahihain, in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, a concise book that has less than 1,000 ahadith that contains the foundational ahadith of the rulings of Islam, the most authentic ahadith that are found after Imam Malik in the Sahihain itself. Then he focused his attention to these books, and then he explained these books, one explanation in the Arabic language, Al-Musawwa. He wrote an explanation of Muwatta in the Arabic language, Al-Musawwa, for the students of knowledge, and he wrote an explanation in the Farsi Persian language for the layman general Muslims, so that they could return back to the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and benefit from it and derive rulings directly from it and understand the Sunnah, which is the explanation Al-Musaffa. Al-Musaffa. So he wrote two explanations of the book Muwatta, Al-Musawwa in the Arabic language and Al-Musaffa in the Farsi Persian language. And in both of these explanations, one finds clearly the methodology of Shah Waliullah Dahlawi in the religion of Islam, which is the methodology and madhab of the Ahle-Hadith, that in every matter of jurisprudence in which he explains the ahadith of Muwatta Malik, then he will mention the madhahib of the scholars. The Hanafi madhab is position, the Maliki madhab is position, and the Shafi'i madhab is position, and then he would say that the correct position in light of the proofs of the Quran and the Sunnah is the statement of so and so, either the Hanafis or the Malikis or the Shafi'is, without confining, restricting himself to a madhab and making taqleed of it, going with the proof, and whoever said in accordance with the proof. So this is a methodology that Shah Waliullah Dahlawi he laid down in his books, calling the Muslims, awakening them from the slumber of extremism, fanatism, and calling them towards the teachings and guidance of the Quran and the Sunnah. And he also wrote his well-known book in the Arabic language, Hujjatullah al-Baligha. Hujjatullah al-Baligha, which is one of the most amazing books that have been authored in Islamic history, in which he dealt with the wisdoms of the revelation of the Quran and the Sunnah and the rulings of the Quran and the Sunnah. And he explicitly in this book aided and supported the Ahle-Hadith manhaj, the methodology of the Ahle-Hadith in all matters of the religion. Regarding this book, Imam Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan rahimahullah, in his book Ithaf al-Nubala, he says in the Persian language, which translation in the Urdu language, he says, ये किताब अगरचे इल्म हदीस से मुताल्लिक नहीं, ताहम इसमें बहुत सी अहादीस की शरह कर दी गई है और उनकी हिकमतें व असरार बयान किए गए हैं, ताकि ये किताब अपने फ़न में मुनफरिद हैसियत इख्तियार कर गई है। इससे कबल 1200 साल हिजरत में उलमाए अरब व अजम में से किसी ने ऐसी किताब तसनीफ़ नहीं की। मुअल्लिफ़ की जुमला तसानीफ़ में ये उम्दा तरीन तसनीफ़ है। वाक़या ये है कि इस किताब की खूबियों को हैता तहरीर में लाना मुश्किल है। He says that this book, Hujjatullah al-Baligha, even though it is not specific to hadith and its sciences, but in this book, Shah Waliullah Dahlawi, the author, he has explained the meanings and the wisdoms behind several of the ahadith of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, those ahadith that are in aid and support of the Ahle-Hadith and their madhab that are in contention between the Hanafis, Ahlul Rai and the Ahle-Hadith. And he says, Imam Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan, that this is one of the rarest books that has been authored by the scholars. He says before him for 1200 years, for 12 centuries, then the scholars are both the Arabs and the non-Arabs, then you rarely find a book that resembles Hujjatullahi al-Baligha. And he says that this is the best book of Shah Waliullah Dahlavi amongst the hundreds of books that he authored in 3 languages, in Arabic, in Persian and in Urdu. This is his best authorship, and he says that one cannot enumerate the praise and the magnificent features of this book. Shah Waliullah Dahlavi also wrote explicit books in refutation of taqleed, blind following of imam, and of ta'assub, extremism, fanatism towards the madhahib, and that which the madhahib and fanaticism and extremism to them has unleashed upon the Muslims from differing, from quarreling, and from enmity and hatred. So he authored his well-known book Al-Insaf fi Bayan Sabab al-Ikhtilaf, Al-Insaf fi Bayan Sabab al-Ikhtilaf, in which he'll shed light upon this disease of fanaticism and extremism towards the madhahib, and how it has split the Muslims, and the solution to this disease and the cure to this disease, which is to return back to the Quran and the Sunnah unrestrictedly, and following it without confinement and restricting to a madhab. He also wrote his book Aqtul Jeed fi Mabahith al-Ijtihadi wa Taqleed in the Arabic language, in which he discussed the matter of taqleed, blindly following and its ruling, and aided the Ahle-Hadith position and manhaj in this regard. And he has several other books that one can mention that are filled with this aid and mission of his, of the Ahle-Hadith methodology, calling the Muslims back to the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah unrestrictedly, such as his books Tafhimat Ilahiyya and Qurrat al-Ainain fi Tafdil al-Shaykhain and Tuhfat al-Muwahhideen and Sharh Tarajim Abwab Sahih al-Bukhari, in which he explained the chapter headings of Imam al-Bukhari in his book As-Sahih, and other books. Imam Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan rahimahullah also says in his book Ithaf al-Nubula, इंसाफ की बात है कि अगर वो पहले ज़माने और माजी में होते तो इमामुल अइम्मा और ताज al-मुज्तहिदीन में शुमार होते. That truth and justice is that to say that if Shah Waliullah Dahlavi was in a previous time, in the early times, then he would have been considered Imamul Aimma. He would have been considered Imam of the Imams, which is a label that has been given to very few scholars in the history of Islam. He would have been considered Imamul Aimma, and he would have considered the crown jewel of the Mujtahideen, of the scholars who unrestrictedly follow the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah. And his books, as we said, are filled with calling to this methodology of the Ahle-Hadith. So for example, his book Hujjatullahi al-Baligha, he says in explanation of the hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ, he said that the Muslims, they will split into 73 sects, and that all of them will be in the hellfire except for one. He said, explaining this hadith, أقول الفرقة الناجية هم الآخذون في العقيدة والعمل جميعا بما ظهر من الكتاب والسنة وجرى عليه جمهور الصحابة والتابعين. He says in explanation of this hadith that the firqa najiyah, the saved sect, they are the ones who take from the apparent texts and proofs of the Quran and the Sunnah in matters of creed, in matters of worship, and in rulings of Islam, and they understand these texts of the Quran and the Sunnah upon the understanding of the Sahaba and the Tabi'in, upon that which the Sahaba and the Tabi'in, how they implemented these texts and followed these texts. He also says in another place in this book, Hujjatullah al-Baligha, regarding the hadith in which Raful Yadain, in which the several hadith in which Raful Yadain, the matter of raising the hands before the ruku and after the ruku has come, which are mutawatir hadith. They are hadith that have reached such a level, narrated by so many of the companions of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and then their students of the Tabi'in and their students, in every level of the chain of narration, that it is impossible that ever a mistake could have occurred in these ahadith and these narrations. So mentioning one of those ahadith, he says, وَالَّذِي يَرْفَعْ أَحَبُّ إِلَيَّ مِمَّنْ لَا يَرْفَعْ فَإِنَّ أَحَادِيثَ الرَّفْعِ أَكْثَرُ وَأَثْبَتْ. He says, calling the fanatics, extremists from the Hanafis, Ahlul Rai in those times, those who were his students and followers, that the one who raises his hands before the ruku and after the ruku, he is more beloved to me than the one who does not raise his hands. Than the one who does not raise his hands, because the ahadith of raising the hands before and after the ruku, they are much more in number and they are much more authentic. They are much more authentic. He says in his book, Aqtul Jeed fi Mabahith al-Ijtihad wa Taqleed, regarding the matter of taqleed, dividing it into two types. That taqleed that is permissible and that taqleed that is impermissible. So he says regarding that which is permissible, وَأَمَّا إِمَارَةَ هَذَا التَّقْلِيدِ أَنْ يَكُونَ عَمَلُهُ بِقَوْلِ الْمُجْتَهِدِ كَالْمَشْرُوطِ لِكَوْنِهِ مُوَافِقًا لِلسُّنَّةِ فلا يزال متفحصا عن السنة بقدر الإمكان فمتى ظهر الحديث يخالف قوله هذا أخذ بالحديث وإليه أشار الأئمة. That he says the sign of the taqleed that is permissible, blindfolding that is permissible, is that one acts upon the ruling of a scholar with the condition that it remains in agreement with the sunnah and the authentic hadith and the authentic proof from the sunnah, and that he continues to search for the sunnah and the authentic proof, that he does not just suffice with blindly following this scholar. This is what it has been made apparent to him from the first get-go, that it is in agreement with the sunnah, but he continues to search. He continues to search according to his ability. So as soon as it becomes apparent to him that this statement of this scholar is in opposition to the authentic sunnah, then he leaves and abandons immediately the statement of this scholar and follows the hadith, follows the authentic sunnah, and this is the position of the imams of Islam. He says in another place regarding the taqleed that is forbidden, the blindfolding that is forbidden, he says, فَإِنْ بَلَغَهُ حَدِيث وَاسْتَيْقَنَ بِصِحَّتِهِ لَمْ يَقْبَلْهُ لكون ذمته مشغولة بالتقليد فهذا اعتقاد فاسد وقول كاسد ليس له شاهد من النقل والعقل وما كان أحد من القرون السابقة يفعل ذلك. He says, if someone was to convey the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ and he became sure of his authenticity, and then he rejects this hadith, he does not accept this hadith and claims that he is a muqallid, he is a blind follower of so and so from the imams who has said in opposition to this hadith, he said this is the false belief of taqleed, and this statement of his is rejected. It does not have any proofs in the naqal, in the text of the Quran and the Sunnah, nor does it confine to the intellect, and he says no one from the past generations, from the generations of the Salaf al-Salih, the rightly guided predecessors, and after them, they used to do this, that they would reject authentic hadith, claiming that they are blind followers of an imam from the imams. And he says, and he says also in his book Aqtul Jeed, فَإِن بَلَغَنَا حَدِيث مِنْ الرَّسُولِ الْمَعْصُومِ الَّذِي فَرَضَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْنَا طَاعَتَهُ بِسَنَدٍ صَالِحٍ يَدُلُّ عَلَى خِلَافِ مَذْهَبِهِ وَتَرَكْنَا حَدِيثَهُ وَاتَّبَعْنَا ذَلِكَ التَّخْمِينَ فَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِنَّا وَمَا عُذْرُنَا يَوْمَ يَقُومُ النَّاسُ لِرَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. He says, if a hadith was to be conveyed to us on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who is free from all mistakes, he's ma'soom, he has been protected and freed from all mistakes, and Allah Ta'ala has made following him and obeying him obligatory upon us. So if a hadith, his statement was to be conveyed to us with the authentic chain, and it is in opposition to the madhab. It is opposition to the madhab from the madhahib, and then we abandon this hadith and we follow the madhab. That which statement, then it is of a statement of a person who is not free from mistakes, who makes errors and mistakes. He says, then who is more oppressive than us in such a situation, in such a case? And what will be our excuse in front of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, the Lord of the heavens and the earth, when we will be brought to judgment in front of Him? When we will be brought to judgment in front of Him. And Shah Waliullah Dahlawi, he says in his wasiyah, in his will and advice, final advice to his children and his grandchildren, which is published in the Urdu language, Majmu'a Wasaya Arba, his 4 great pieces of advice to his family members after him, from the scholars, from the great scholars of the Indo-Pak subcontinent. He says, उम्मत को किसी वक्त भी क़ियासी मसाइल में किताब व सुन्नत से इस्तिग़ना हासिल नहीं है। ऐसी रजअत पसंद फ़ुक़हा की बात को नहीं सुनना चाहिए और उनकी तरफ तवज्जो ना करनी चाहिए कि जिन्होंने किसी एक आलिम की तक़लीद को इख्तियार कर लिया हो और सुन्नत को तर्क कर दिया हो। इनसे दूर रहने में खुदा का करीब समझना चाहिए. That he says as his parting advice to the scholars from his children and his grandchildren, he says that the Muslims then they have no choice in matters in which qiyas, deductive analogy, has been done and rulings have been made by way of one's intellect and one's opinion and judgment, that these matters are to be returned back to the Quran and the Sunnah. There's no choice except to returning these matters back to the Quran and the Sunnah, and one should not listen to the statements and the rulings of those so-called fuqaha, those so-called jurists who make taqleed, blind following of a scholar, and confine and restrict themselves to all of his statements and positions and rulings in the matter of the religion, and they abandon the Sunnah and the Hadith for that Imam and that scholar. Rather, to stay away from such jurists or so-called jurists, then in it is closeness to Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. In it, one should consider closeness to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. And in some of these quotes of some of his books, we see the clear methodology and efforts of this great Mujaddid reviver in reviving the methodology of the Ahle-Hadith and calling the Muslims back to the texts and the proofs of the Quran and the Sunnah, and removing them from the darkness of blind following and extremism and fanatism towards madhahib and imams. And from the major scholars of the Hanafis themselves, then they have given proof to this methodology. This is not just a claim that the Ahlul-Hadith make, that he was upon the methodology of the Ahlul-Hadith and the Fuqaha al-Muhaddithin. Rather, the Hanafis themselves, those who are just and they speak with justice, they themselves have given proof and made a testimony of this. So Abdul Qadir Rampuri, in his book Ilm wa Amal, he says अक़ायद व अक़लियात में दलाइल के पैरों हैं और आमाल व नक़लियात में हदीस और अखबार मुतवातिर और कुरान के मुताबिक हैं. बात मुज्तहिदाना कहते हैं, महज तक़लीद की तरफ नहीं दौड़ते. That Abdul Qadir Rampuri, he says in his book Ilm wa Amal, that in matters of creed and belief, Shah Waliullah Dahlawi, he follows the text of the Quran and the Sunnah, and in matters of actions and worship and jurisprudence, then he follows the authentic ahadith and narrations of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he is someone who unrestrictedly, unconditionally follows the text of the Quran and the Sunnah, that he speaks with the proofs of the Quran and the Sunnah like the mujtahideen. He is someone who does not just run behind taqleed. He is someone who does not run behind blind following of a imam and a mazhab from the mazahib. Rahman Ali, in his well-known book Tazkira Ulama Hind, which is one of the foremost of the sources of the scholars and especially the Hanafi scholars in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. He says regarding Shah Waliullah Dehlavi, who he has mentioned in this book as the foremost of the scholars, he says वो ज़ाहिरी व बातिनी फ़ज़ाइल के मालिक थे, इसलिए फ़ुक़हाए मुहद्दिसीन के तरीके इख्तियार फरमाया. That he possessed all types of virtues, internal and external, and he was upon the way and methodology of the fuqaha al-muhaddithin, the methodology of the scholars and jurists from the Ahle-Hadith, in unconditionally and restrictedly following the proofs of the Quran and the Sunnah. Manzoor Nu'mani, Muhammad Manzoor Nu'mani, also from the foremost scholars of the Hanafis, he says in a special magazine number of Shah Waliullah Dehlavi, in the well-known magazine of the Hanafis, Al-Furqan, that is published from Bareilly in India, he says regarding Shah Waliullah Dehlavi, आज हमारे हनफी हलकों में हनफियत के जो माना उमूमन समझा जाते हैं, इनके एतबार से शाह साहब को हनफी कहना यकीनन ज़बरदस्ती है. हमारी हनफी दुनिया में आज इस शख्स को कहाँ हनफी तस्लीम किया जा सकता है जिसका उसूल दाइमन तफरीआत फ़िक़हिया राबर किताब व सुन्नत अर्ज़ नमूदन हो, और जो किताब व सुन्नत से फ़िक़्ह की तनकीद के उसूल को क़ियामत तक के लिए उम्मत का फ़र्ज़ करार देता हो. He says that today in our Hanafi gatherings and the scholars who are upon the Hanafi madhab, then to consider Shah Waliullah Dehlavi to be from the Hanafis, then without a doubt, then this is transgression. This is transgression. As all of the Deobandis, Bareilwis, Jamaat Islami, they all claim ascription to Shah Waliullah Dehlavi and claim that he was from them, that he was from the foremost of the scholars of the Hanafis, Ahlul Rai, and Manzoor Nu'mani is from the Bareilwis of the Hanafi faction. He is saying that to consider Shah Waliullah Dehlavi from the Hanafis, then without a doubt this is transgression. Without a transgression, he says, how can this person be considered a Hanafi when his whole base of his call and his principle was to return the rulings of the madhab and the rulings of the jurists, the fuqaha, and present them upon the Quran and the Sunnah. Present them upon the Quran and the Sunnah. And the one who taught the Muslims and made it obligatory upon them to return the statements of the scholars, from the jurists, from the imams of the madhahib, back to the Quran and the Sunnah until the end of times. Until the end of times, how can such a person be considered a Hanafi amongst the Hanafis today? He also says in another place in this article, he says, मेरा ख्याल है कि अगर आज कोई फाजिल दियानतदारी से इस रविश पर चले और शाह साहिब ही की तरह इसको हनफियत के मुनाक़िद ना समझता हो, बल्कि उसको भी हनफियत ही का एक तरीका समझता हो और उसी बिना पर अपना रिश्ता हनफियत से भी रखना चाहता हो, तो हमारे ज़माने के तिकसाली किस्म के हनफी हजरात कभी भी इसको हनफी तस्लीम नहीं करेंगे. He says that my opinion is that if today someone from the scholars who is religious and he is pious and he wishes to follow this methodology of Shah Waliullah Dehlavi that he has left behind in his books and in his teachings, if someone wants to follow this methodology while simultaneously claiming to be Hanafi, while simultaneously claiming his ascription and attachment to the Hanafi madhab and claiming to be Hanafi, and he wants to keep this relationship with the Hanafi madhab intact, then our Hanafi scholars of today, they will never accept him to be a Hanafi. The one who follows this methodology, Shah Waliullah Dehlavi, the Hanafis, they can never accept him, they will never accept him to be a Hanafi. So these are some of the proofs of the Hanafis and from the major scholars of the Hanafis from the Deobandi and the Bareilwi streams themselves regarding Shah Waliullah Dehlavi and their testimonies about his methodology, that he was upon the methodology of the Ahle-Hadith, the reviver of this methodology, who laid the foundation of this methodology in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, that his children and then his grandchildren and then the scholars who came after them, they led forth and carried, as will come inshallah in our coming lectures, Shah Waliullah Dahlawi, this great reviver, he passed away in the year 1176 after the Hijrah in the city of Delhi. Then we will move to another point of discussion after covering the biographies and mentioning the foremost of the scholars from the Sahaba and the Tabi'in and the Tabi'in from the Salaf, who came to the Indo-Pak subcontinent, who had great efforts in spreading Islam in the Indo-Pak subcontinent upon the methodology of the Ahle-Hadith before this mazahib even existed. And then from the 4th century until the 12th century, until Shah Waliullah Dahlawi, where scholars in every time, no matter how small their numbers are, they have existed, who aided this methodology and aided the Ahle-Hadith positions in matters of the religion, until Shah Waliullah Dahlawi revived this methodology openly in the 12th century. Then we'll move on to another point of discussion, which is the effects of similar methodologies in other lands, similar movements of calling back to the Quran and the Sunnah, of similar movements in the other lands of the methodology of the Ahlul Hadith of calling to the Quran and the Sunnah unrestrictedly, without confining, restricting to a madhab, having fanaticism, extremism to it, blind following an imam from the imams, giving it precedence over the Sunnah. Then similar movements, they arose in the 12th century in those times, and the Ahlul Hadith of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, then they also benefited from these movements in the Arab lands, and they benefited from the scholars of these movements and incorporated their specialities that they became foremost in due to the positions and the status of the people in their lands, and they benefited from it, incorporated in their own call. This is what we will mention now, and these three movements which influenced greatly the Ahlul Hadith, Dawah in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. There are the three movements. These movements are heavily influenced and affected the Ahlul Hadith Dawah in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. The three movements: the movement of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, the movement of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, and the movement of Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad Abdul Wahhab, and the movement of Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Ali al-Shawkani. So these are three movements that heavily influenced and affected, and the scholars of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, Ahlul Hadith, they benefited from these movements and their specialities that each movement was specialized in due to the region and the time and the place that they arose in. So the first of these movements that we'll discuss is the movement of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah. Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, and he is Imam Abu al-Abbas Taqiyuddin Ahmad ibn Abdul Halim ibn Taymiyyah al-Harrani al-Dimashqi, from the city of Dimashq, the capital of Syria, Damascus, from the major centers of Islamic knowledge throughout centuries. He was born in the year 661 after the Hijrah, and he passed away in the year 728 after the Hijrah. And he is from the illuminaries of the Muslims throughout history, from the foremost of the scholars and imams and revivers of the Muslims. And this is not just a claim of the Ahlul Hadith, rather the Hanafis themselves, the Hanafis, the Ahlul Rai themselves, they have gave testimony to the great status and position of this great Imam and reviver, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah. So from the major Hanafi scholars of the previous century was Shibli Nomani. Shibli Nomani, he says regarding Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah in an article that he wrote on the life of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, titled Imam ibn Taymiyyah in the Urdu language, that we will mention in detail in the coming minutes. He says, Islam mein सैकड़ों बल्कि लाखों उलमा फुज़ला मुज्तहिदीन अइम्मा फ़न मुदब्बिरीन मुल्क गुज़रे, लेकिन मुजद्दिद यानी रिफॉर्मर बहुत कम पैदा हुए. जो शख्स रिफॉर्मर मुजद्दिद का असली मिस्दाक हो सकता है वो अल्लामा इब्न तैमिया है. मुजद्दिदियत की असली खुसूसियतें जिस कदर अल्लामा की ज़ात में पाई जाती हैं, इसकी नज़ीर बहुत कम मिल सकती है. That he says in Islam throughout centuries, there's several, he says several, rather hundreds and thousands of scholars have come, and people of virtue have come, and jurists have come, and rulers have come, but the attribute of reviving the religion, then this has only been found in a select group of people, in a select handful of people. And he says the one who is most deserving of this attribute and description of being a reviver of the religion of Islam, he is Imam Ibn Taymiyyah. He is Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. He says the attributes of a reviver that were found in him from his knowledge, his piety, his virtues, nobility, and all other attributes that were found in him, then they are rarely found in any other personality throughout history. And Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, in the 7th century after the Hijrah, in the dark eras of Islamic history, when all types of innovations and misguidance and fanatism, extremism, taqleed, blindfolding to imams and madhahib and all types of people of innovation, misguidance, they had taken strong foot and hold over the Muslim nation. He called and he strove and he sacrificed everything in calling the Muslims back to holding firm to the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah, and following the methodology of the Salaf in understanding the Quran and the Sunnah, which is the madhab and the manhaj of the Ahle-Hadith and the Ahle-Hadith. And this is what he is known by throughout centuries as being the one who upheld the methodology of the Salaf, Ahle-Hadith, in this dark middle centuries, that revived this methodology for the people who came after him. The people who came after him, everyone who has treaded upon this methodology and called to this methodology, then they have benefited from the literature and the books and the call and the efforts of Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. And regarding him, the great scholar of the Ahle-Hadith, Allama Abul Kalam Azad, the student of Imam Mujaddid Sayyid Nazir Hussain Dahlawi rahimahullah, he says in his great book that he authored regarding the call and methodology of Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah, in his book Tazkira, which will come soon, he says in this book in the Urdu language, आजकल मुसलमानों में जिस फितना अकायद ने सर उठाया है और बाहुक्म बल क़ालू मिस्ल मा क़ाल अल-अव्वलून, वो तमाम फितने इकट्ठा होकर पलट आए हैं जो अकायद इस्लामिया के मुख्तलिफ़ दौरों में फ़र्दन ज़ाहिर हुए थे। इस लिहाज से आज मारिफ इब्न तैमिया से बढ़कर और कोई चीज़ मतलूब व मकसूद वक्त नहीं। Showing the importance of the literature and the books and the call of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, that he has provided proofs, and he is a lamp for the people who tread upon this methodology of calling to the Quran and the Sunnah upon the understanding of the Salaf, the Ahle-Hadith, that it has provided proofs and a way for them in every time. In every time, he says, in our times, Allama Abul Kalam Azad, that in our times we find all types of deviance in matters of creed, and we find the realization of this ayah in which Allah Ta'ala says that the people will say that we have found our forefathers upon a way and we will stay upon that way. We will stay upon that way, and all types of trials and tribulations that have afflicted the Muslims, then he says that the only way out and the cure for this is benefiting from the literature and the books of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. This is the need of our times. This is the need of our times. And the books and the call of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah and his efforts, then they reached the Indo-Pak subcontinent during his life. They reached the Indo-Pak subcontinent during his life. So from the scholars' biographies who we have presented in previous lectures, we mentioned from them was Allama Abdul Aziz Ardebili, and he is from we mentioned that he is from the direct students of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, who came to the Indo-Pak subcontinent during the rule of Muhammad Tughlaq. From the Tughlaq dynasty, he came to the Indo-Pak subcontinent, to Delhi, and he took up residence in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. Also from the students of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, is mentioned Alamuddin Multani, regarding him, Akbar Shah Khan Najib Abadi, he says in his Safarnama, in his book in the Urdu language in which he compiled his travels, he says Hazrat Imam Ibn Taymiyyah की सोहबत याफ्ता और सुल्तान मोहम्मद तुगलक को सबसे ज़्यादा बिदआत व अवहाम परस्ती के कला कम पर आमदा करने वाले शख्स थे. That Alamuddin Multani, then he was from the students of Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah, the one who traveled to the Indo-Pak subcontinent during the time of the ruler of the Tughlaq dynasty, Muhammad Tughlaq, and he influenced him to fight innovations and misguidances that have spread amongst the Muslims in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. And this ruler, Muhammad Tughlaq, then we find in his biography, when we read his biography, that he had efforts in trying to eradicate the darkness of the Sufis and Tasawwuf that had taken firm hold in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, and matters of shirk, major association with Allah Ta'ala in his worship, and the whole religion of Sufis that is based upon graves and worshipping graves and slaughtering to them and calling upon the dead and making tawaf around graves and making mausoleums over the dead. Then he had efforts in eradicating these types of evils and innovations and misguidance, and this could only be considered the effect of the call and the movement of Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, the call and the movement of Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. The historian of our generation, or past generation, in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, Khalid Ahmed Nizami, he says in his book Salatin Hind ke Mazhabi Rujhanat, in the Urdu language, in which he collected the methodology and the efforts of the Muslim rulers in the Indo-Pak subcontinent throughout centuries. He says Imam Ibn Taymiyyah की तहरीक बहुत हमागिरी थी. इन्होंने मुसलमानों की समाज, दीन और सियासत के एक एक गोशे को कुरान और सुन्नत की रोशनी में परखा था और इसकी इस्लाह की कोशिश की थी. इनकी किताबों में मिनहाज सुन्ना और सियासत शरइया के मुताले से मालूम होता है कि इन्होंने उमूर सियासी का निहायत बालिग नज़री से मुताला किया था और वो अपने मुआसिरीन की दीनी शऊर में खिलाफत व इमामत का सही तसव्वुर बेदार करने के लिए बेचैन थे. उनकी ज़िंदगी में उनकी तसनीफ़ात मिस्र से चीन तक फैल गई थी. मुमकिन नहीं कि मोहम्मद बिन तुगलक, जो ममालिक इस्लामी की इल्मी व दीनी तहरीकों से बाखबर रहता था, उन किताबों से ना बुलंद रहा हो. He says that Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah, then his call and his movement was based upon reviving all aspects of the Muslims, from their religious aspect, from the political aspects, from the economical aspects, from the social aspects. He returned the Muslims in all of these matters back to the Quran and the Sunnah and corrected their misguidance and their deviation in these matters. His books such as Minhaj al-Sunnah and Siyasa al-Shar'iyya, when one looks upon them, reads them, ponders upon them, he finds great proofs of this, that he wanted to establish a rule for the Muslims that is based upon the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah, as it was in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and after him in the Khulafa al-Rashideen's time, the four rightly guided caliphs. And he says in the lifetime of Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah, his books had spread all the way from Misr, Egypt in the west of the Muslim lands, to China in the east of the Muslim lands. And he says it is impossible that Muhammad bin Tughlaq, this mighty, powerful ruler of the Muslims of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, that it is impossible that his books did not reach him, who is from the contemporaries of Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. As we said, the students of Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah traveled to him in his lifetime. He says it's impossible that such a ruler who had rule over such great lands in which the Muslims traveled from, that the books and the movement and the scholar of Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah, he did not reach him. He says ziyarat-e-qubur, sama, tasawwur-e-wilayat, खानकाही निज़ाम वगैरह पर उनके ख़यालात मजमूआ रसाइल में पढ़े जा सकते हैं. मोहम्मद बिन तुगलक गालिबन इन ख़यालात से मुतासर हुआ था. इसने सूफिया के तसव्वुर विलायत के ख़ातिमे और खानकाई निज़ाम को दरहम बरहम करने के लिए अपने दौरे हुकूमत में जो कोशिशें की वो इमाम इब्न तैमिया की तहरीक और तसव्वुरात से बहुत मुशाबहत रखती हैं. That Muhammad ibn Tughlaq, he had efforts in eradicating the shirk that is done in graves and the gatherings of the Sufis of Sama, that is known as Qawwali, dancing and singing, and their beliefs of wilayat, that they are awliya who control the heavens and the earth, and that they manage the affairs of the creation level after the level, and they have specific terminologies for this, qutub and ghawth, etc. That are all matters of major shirk, attributing these attributes of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala to the creation, and the whole religion that is based upon graves. Then one can find efforts in eradicating these innovations and misguidance and shirk in the books of Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah and Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Then in most likelihood he was influenced by these books of Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah that reached him, and his efforts against the Sufis and the Sufi way of religion in the Indo-Pak subcontinent that had taken stronghold at that time. Then it is the result of the call and the movement of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, and it has close resemblance to what is found in his books, what is found in his books. And we also mentioned that this influence of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, it continued in the scholars of the Indo-Pak subcontinent even after his death. So we mentioned from the previous scholars, Allama Muhammad bin Tahir Patni in our previous lectures, and Sheikh Ja'far ibn Miran, Bubakani Sindhi, that they quoted in vast numbers Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah in their books. They quoted in vast numbers quotes referencing the books of Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah, showing that his effect and influence, it continued in the scholars of the Indo-Pak subcontinent throughout centuries until we reach the time of Shah Wali al-Dahlawi, the reviver of this movement of calling to the Quran and the Sunnah and laying the foundation of this tree in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. When we look into his life, we see that he wrote a letter to one of his foremost students, whose biography we presented, Muhammad Mu'in Tattawi from Sindh, and he is the author of the well-known book Dirasat al-Labib, in which he refuted extremism, fanaticism towards the mazahib and taqleed of the imams. He wrote a letter, Shah Wali al-Dahlawi, to the student, in which he advised him to benefit from the books of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah and the literature of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, and return back to it. So he said in this letter to his student, Shah Wali al-Dahlawi, to his student Muhammad Mu'in Tattawi, he says, فَإِنَّا قَدْ تَحَقَّقْنَا مِنْ حَالِهِ أَنَّهُ عَالِمْ بِكِتَابِ اللَّهِ ومعانيه اللغوية والشرعية، حافظ لسنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وآثار السلف، عارف لمعانيهما اللغوية والشرعية، أستاذ في النحو واللغة، ومحرر لمذهب الحنابلة فروعه وأصوله، فائق في الذكاء، ذو لسان وبلاغة في الذب عن عقيدة أهل السنة، لم يؤثر عنه فسق ولا بدعة، اللهم إلا هذه الأمور التي ضيق عليه لأجلها، وليس شيء منها إلا ومعه دليله من الكتاب والسنة وآثار السلف. فمثل هذا الشيخ عزيز الوجود في العلم، ومن يطيق أن يلحق شأوه في تحريره وتقريره، والذين ضيقوا عليه ما بلغوا معشار ما آتاه الله تعالى، وإن كان تضييقه ذلك ناشئا من اجتهاد ومشاجرة العلماء في مثل ذلك ما هي إلا كمشاجرة الصحابة رضي الله عنهم فيما بينهم، والواجب في ذلك كف اللسان إلا بخير. He says, advising his student, that verily I have researched the books of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah with great detail, and I have reached the conclusion that he is from the well-grounded scholars in the book of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, the Quran, and the meanings and tafsir of the Quran, both the literal meanings and the legislative meanings of the ayat of the Quran, and is someone who is from the well-grounded scholars in the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he has well-grounded vast knowledge of the athar of the Salaf, the athar, the statements of the Sahaba and the Tabi'in and the Tabi'in, and he knows the meanings, the literal and the legislative meanings of the Sunnah and the athar, and he is well grounded in the Arabic language, and he is from the researchers of the Hanbali madhab, that he is not someone who's a blind follower in the Hanbali madhab, that he restricted himself to the Hanbali madhab. Rather, he is someone who is a muharrir in the Hanbali madhab, that he opposed the Hanbali madhab in positions in which he found the Quran and the Sunnah to be in opposition to it, in both its furu and its usul, in both matters of jurisprudence and principles of jurisprudence. And he is someone who was a brilliant scholar of Islam, someone who had great efforts in defending the creed of Ahlul Sunnah, and there is no statement of his that is a statement of open sinning or innovation, that is open sinning and innovation of misguidance, except for those positions that he ruled with, that some of the scholars of evil in his time oppressed him regarding, and he says that he has not ruled with and said anything except that he has his proofs from the Quran and the Sunnah and the Athar of the Salaf. So he says, such a scholar, then he is someone is very rare in the Muslim nation, and who can reach his level and position in his reaches and his ocean of knowledge. And he says those scholars of evil who oppressed him for his positions in which he followed the Quran and the Sunnah and opposed them, then they do not even reach one-tenth of the knowledge that Allah Ta'ala blessed Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah with. And they oppressed him for him doing ijtihad, following the Quran and the Sunnah unrestrictedly, opposing the madhab and taqleed. And they did not realize that disagreement in these matters is like the disagreement that occurred amongst the Sahaba. Radiallahu anhum. So it was obligatory upon them that they refrained from this evil, and they accepted his position based on the Quran and the Sunnah, and they only mentioned him with goodness. And Imam Shawul al-Dahlawi, then he has extensively quoted Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah in several of his books, and it is clear from his books his influence, the influence of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah and his movement and his call and his methodology upon this great reviver of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, Shah Waliullah al-Dahlawi. Then came Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan, the Imam of the Ahle-Hadith in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, after Shah Waliullah al-Dahlawi planted this tree of calling the Muslims back to the Quran and the Sunnah unrestrictedly, and removing fanatism, extremism, and blind following of the Imams and the Madhahib. Then his children, his grandchildren followed this legacy along until came the Imams of the Ahle-Hadith, who openly they called to this methodology, and they devoted their lives to their methodology. From the foremost of them is Imam Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan, by way of his books, who devoted his life to authoring books in aid of this methodology and in defending the Ahlul Hadith madhab and methodology. And his companion Imam Nazir Hussain Dahlawi, who by way of teaching cultivated thousands and tens of thousands of students from the foremost scholars of Islam upon this methodology of the Ahlul Hadith. So Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan rahimahullah, he got exposed to the literature of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah in the year 1285 after the Hijrah, when he made his first Hajj, when he made his first pilgrimage to Hijaz, of Hajj to Mecca, and then he traveled to Hijaz, Mecca and Medina. Here he attained the books of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah. He attained the books of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, and from the scholars of the Arabic Peninsula, from the major scholars from the movement that were produced from the movement of Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad Abdul Wahhab, is Allama Hamad ibn Ali ibn Atiq, who passed away in the year 1306 after the Hijrah. He advised Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan rahimahullah with the books and literature of the two Imams, Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah and his student Imam Ibn al-Qayyim. Imam Ibn al-Qayyim. And the second scholar in the Arab lands who advised and directed Imam Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan to the books and the literature of Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah is Imam, his Shaykh and teacher, Imam Hussein bin Muhsin al-Ansari, Yamani, who was the third Imam of the Ahle-Hadith along with Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan and Imam Nazir Hussain Dahlawi. And then Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan, he brought him when he became the ruler of Bhopal, the Islamic state of Bhopal in Madhya Pradesh in India. He brought him as the supreme scholar of this state, Allama Imam Hussein bin Muhsin Yamani, who took up residence in the state, spreading the Ahlul-Hadith madhab, manhaj and benefiting the students until he passed away, as will come in the future. So these two scholars, Allama Hamad bin Atiq and Allama Hussein bin Muhsin Ansari, they advised Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan in Hijaz to collect and gather whatever books of Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah he could gather. So he bought some of the manuscripts of the books of Iqtida Sirat al-Mustaqim of Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, and he also bought the manuscript of the book As-Siyasa Al-Shar'iyya, and he became so influenced by it that he copied it with his own hand during this travel. At those times there were no way of photocopying books, so the only way was for one to do naskh, to write it with one's hand. So he copied this book in this travel. And Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan, his influence by Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah is apparent in his books. His benefit from the literature of Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, he has quoted him extensively in his books. So in his books, Ithaf al-Nubala and Tiqsar Jiyud al-Ahrar and Taj al-Mukallal and Abjad al-Ulum and Hidayat al-Sa'il ila Dirlat al-Masail and Hujjat al-Karama fi Athar al-Qiyamah, and other than them, one will find extensive quotes of Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah from his books. And Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan, rahimahullah, when he became the ruler of Bhopal, by marrying the ruler of Bhopal, he published upon his budget, the budget of the rulership of Bhopal, 3 books from the foremost books in defense of Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah in thousands of numbers, and distributed freely all over the world in defense of Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. These 3 books are the book Ar-Radd al-Wafir ala man za'ama anna man samma Ibn Taymiyyah Shaykh al-Islam kafir, of the great Imam Nasiruddin al-Dimashqi, Ibn Nasiruddin al-Dimashqi, who passed away in the year 842 after the Hijrah. In this book he refuted the Sufis and the Asharis and the people of blind following and fanaticism and extremism to the madhahib, who deemed the one who labeled Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah to be Shaykh al-Islam to be a disbeliever, waliyadhu billah. So he wrote this great book in refutation of it. Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan published it on his budget and then distributed freely to the scholars and the Muslims all over the world. From these books that he published is the book of Shaykh Muhammad ibn Ahmad al-Bukhari al-Nabulusi al-Hanafi, from the Hanafi scholars, to show the Hanafis, the fanatics, extremists in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, that even from their own scholars are those people who respected and revered Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. They respected and revered Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. He wrote his book Al-Qawl al-Jali fi Tarjumat al-Shaykh Taqiyuddin Ibn Taymiyyah al-Hanbali. So he published this book and distributed it amongst the Hanafis in the Indo-Pak subcontinent and in the regions of Turkey, that was the Ottoman Empire in those times. And the third book that he's published is the book, well-known book of Allama al-Alusi Abul Barakat Khairuddin Nu'man ibn Mahmud al-Alusi. He passed away in the year 1317 after the Hijrah, which is the well-known book Jalal al-Ainain fi Muhakamat al-Ahmadain. Jalal al-Ainain fi Muhakamat al-Ahmadain, in which Nu'man al-Alusi, he compared between the literature and the works and the efforts of Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, whose name is Ahmad ibn Abdul Halim ibn Taymiyyah, and another of the foremost scholars who the Sufis especially return to and revolve around, who is Ibn Hajar al-Haytami al-Makki, and his name is also Ahmad ibn Hajar al-Haytami al-Makki. So he compared the works and the statements of these two Imams and gave the precedence of the works and the words of Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah to it being in agreement with the Quran and the Sunnah upon the understanding of the Salaf in comparison to the statements of Ibn Hajar al-Haytami in his book Jalal Ainain. Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan published this book for the first time ever in the Muslim lands or in the world, and he distributed it free of cost to the Muslims all over the world. Then we find the contemporary of Imam Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan, the Imam, the reviver of the Salafis, Ahle-Hadith in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, Sayyid Nazir Hussain Dahlawi. Sayyid Nazir Hussain Dahlawi, and we see his influence of Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah clear upon him also. Clear upon him also. So in contrast to Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan, Sayyid Nazir Hussain Dahlawi focused his attention on teaching and cultivating scholars and students of knowledge, and we see the influence of the call of Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah upon the students that he cultivated. So from the foremost of the students of Imam Nazir Hussain Dahlawi are the Ghaznavi family. Ghaznavi family, and the head of this family is Imam Abdullah Ghaznavi. Abdullah Ghaznavi, who was from the foremost of the students of Imam Nazir Hussain Dahlawi, and he's from Ghazni in Afghanistan. He had migrated and taken up residence in Amritsar. Amritsar in Punjab, which is in present day India, which is the most blessed city of the Sikhs in the entire world, and it is the central city of the Sikhs. So Allama Abdullah Ghaznavi had taken up residence in this city, and he was from the foremost of the students of Imam Nazir Hussain Dahlawi, and he was blessed with many children, and all of them are scholars, major scholars in their own right, and many of them are also the students of Imam Nazir Hussain Dahlawi. Imam Nazir Hussain Dahlawi, due to him teaching for 62 years in the seat of the Waliullah Dahlawi family in Delhi, he produced scholars generation after generation. Generation after generation studied from him. They are his students. And Allama Attallah Hanif Bhojiani, in his great book that will come, Hayat Shaykh Islam Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, he says, Allama Attallah Hanif Bhojiani, from the major scholars of Ahle-Hadith of the past generation, he says, करीब करीब इन्हीं अयाम में बम्बई के बाज़ इल्म दोस्त अरब ताजरों के ज़रिए हज़रत उलमाए गज़नविया अमृतसर का उमराए व उलमाए नज़्द से ताल्लुक़ पैदा हो गया, जिसके नतीजे में हमारे यहाँ मारिफ इब्न तैमिया का मज़ीद वरूद हुआ, जबकि नवाब साहब का ज़रिया उलमाए हदीस यमन थे। बुज़ुर्गाने गज़नविया मौलाना मोहम्मद साहिब हाशिया तफसीर जामे अल बयान, मौलाना अब्दुल जब्बार, मौलाना अब्दुल रहीम, मौलाना अब्दुल वाहिद की तवज्जो से शेखुल इस्लाम की बाज़ तसानीफ़ तबाह हुई और तदरीसी तरीके से आपकी दावत तौहीद और ज़िक्र व फ़िक्र को आवाम तक पहुँचाने की कोशिश की गई. He says that in the same time of Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan, then some Arab traders, they came to the coastal city of Bombay in the west of the Indo-Pak subcontinent by way of ship, and there the scholars of the Ghaznavi household from the students of Imam Nazir Hussain Dahlawi, they got introduced to these traders, and by way of them they got introduced to the scholars of Najd in the Arabic Peninsula, and there they got further exposed to the literature and books of Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah that were present amongst the Najdi scholars. And as far as Nawab Siddiq Hasan Khan, then he got introduced to them by way of the scholars of Yemen, such as Allama Hussain bin Muhsin Ansari, as we mentioned. And from the foremost of the students of Imam Nazir Hussain Dahlawi, who are the sons of Imam Abdullah Ghaznavi, then he is Muhammad, Abdul Jabbar, Abdul Rahim, Abdul Wahid. All of them, they played their role in publishing the books of Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah for the first time in the world, and they were published by the scholars of this Ghaznavi household in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. And also by way of their teaching and striving in cultivating the students upon the movement and upon the call of Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. This reached all regions of the Indo-Pak subcontinent by way of their efforts. As far as rendering the literature and the teachings of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah into the Urdu language, then the first scholar who has this nobility and virtue is also from the major scholars of the Ahle-Hadith, Allama Ghulam Ali Qasuri. Allama Abu Abdullah Ghulam Ali Qasuri, who is from the city of Qusur in present-day Pakistan, in Punjab. He passed away in the year 1206 after the Hijrah. He is the first person to have translated a book of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah into the Urdu language, allowing the general layman Muslims in the Indo-Pak subcontinent to also benefit from the literature and the teachings and the movement of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah. He translated the book Al-Hamawiyya, well-known book of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, fi Rad al-Jahmiyya, in the topic of Al-Asma wa Sifat, that the belief in the names and attributes of Allah Ta'ala upon the creed of the Salaf, in refutation of the Jahmiya Mu'attila, those who negate the attributes of Allah Ta'ala. He translated this book of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah into the Urdu language, titled Shafiya, Tarjumat Hamawiyya. It was published in the city of Lahore in the year 291 after the Hijrah. 291 after the Hijrah, meaning almost 150 years ago, or more than 150 years ago, in Lahore in the Urdu language. And he also wrote a brief biography of this great Imam Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah in the Urdu language for the layman Muslims of the Indo-Pak subcontinent in the introduction of this book. And this is the first biography of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah that was written in the Urdu language. Then came the major scholar of the Ahle-Hadith, the student of Imam Nazir Hussain Dahlawi, Allama Talattuf Hussain Azimabadi. Talattuf Hussain Azimabadi, who passed away in the year 1334 after the Hijrah. He was from the city of Patna. His previous name is Azimabad, the capital of Bihar in India. And he was from the people who were granted much wealth by Allah Ta'ala. And he spread this wealth and spent it in Allah's cause, in spreading the Ahlul-Hadith madhab and manhaj by way of printing books. By way of printing books and sponsoring scholars to work in editing books, in translating books. He has great virtues over the Ahlul-Hadith in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. His biography will come, inshallah. So he established the printing house, the well-known printing house in Delhi, Matba Ansari, that published the first books of hadith in the entire world. From the major books of hadith, Sahihain and the Sunan Arba'in, its explanations, and the books of Ilm al-Rijal and the books of Jarh wa Ta'dil, for the first time ever that were published in the entire world, where by way of this publishing house, Matba Ansari, in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, under the supervision of Allama Talattuf Hussain Azimabadi. So he also published some of the books of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, and he gave the responsibility to his contemporary and colleague from his city of Patna, Azimabad, Allama Shamsul Haq Azimabadi, from the foremost students also of Imam Nazir Hussain Dahlawi, to work on some of these books, to edit, to put notes on some of these books, and both of them published these books upon their own budget, and then spread it amongst the Muslims in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. So these are some of the major scholars of the Ahlul Hadith and their influence by Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah and his literature and the services for this literature in the Indo-Pak subcontinent. And this is not something that is just restricted to the Ahlul Hadith. We would also like to present one of the major scholars of the Hanafis, who is considered the Imams of the Hanafis in the previous century, who also revered and respected Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah and had great efforts in introducing the heritage and the literature and the movement of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah to his followers, and he is Shibli Nomani. Then he is considered from the Imams of the Hanafis of the previous century, and he was someone who was more open-minded than the general extremist fanatics Hanafis. And this open-mindedness, it led him to follow his intellect, and he became from the mutakallimin, the people of rhetoric, those who gave precedence to his intellect over the text. And sadly, his end of his life, then he passed away being close to those people who rejected the authority of the Sunnah. Those people who rejected the authority of the Sunnah, and he, after his initial life of extremism and fanaticism over the Hanafi madhab, as is the way of all of the Hanafis and the Ahlul Rai, in his latter part of his life, he was introduced to Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah and his works and his literature, and he became heavily influenced, affected by them, and he praised Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah and tried to introduce his works and his movement to his followers and his people. So he wrote a letter to his foremost student, Sayyid Sulaiman Nadwi, also from the major scholars of the Hanafis of our times or previous times, in the year 1214, according to the Gregorian calendar. He wrote a letter to his student encouraging him and pleading with him to benefit from the books and the works of Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah. He says in this letter that are published in Makatib Shibli, a collection of his letters, he says in Urdu, Ibn Taymiyyah ki life farz awwaleen hai, मुझे इस शख्स के सामने राजी व गज़ाली सब पीछे नज़र आते हैं, इनकी तसनीफ़ात में हर रोज़ नई बातें मिलती हैं, बार बार देखना शर्त है. That he wrote to his student Sayyid Sulaiman Nadwi that the life of Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah, then it is a rare life, and it is like the life of the early scholars of Islam. And he says near Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah, then the foremost scholars that the Hanafis and the Ahlul Rai return back to, Ar-Razi, Fakhruddin Razi and Ghazali, then they do not deem anything in rank near Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah, that they seem to be way less in rank compared to the knowledge and virtue of Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah. He says, every day that I read in the books of Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah, I find a new benefit. I benefit a new piece of knowledge, and one is to constantly read in his books to benefit and increase his knowledge. And Sayyid Sulaiman Nadwi, when he received this letter from his Shaykh and teacher Shibli Nomani, he wrote a note. He wrote a note on this letter that is published in his book Hayat Shibli, that he wrote in the biography of his Shaykh and teacher. He included this letter and a note on it. He says in this book in the Urdu language, Maulana रोज़ बरोज़ इब्न तैमिया के बहुत मुअतक़िद होते जाते थे, बल्कि एक बार मकतूब इलैहि से ये भी फरमाते थे कि मैं अक़ाइद और फ़िक़हियात हर चीज़ में इब्न तैमिया को तस्लीम करता हूँ. That he says that my Shaykh and teacher Shibli Nomani, every day that he read the works and literature of Shaykh ibn Taymiyyah, he became even more influenced and started to even hold Shaykh ibn Taymiyyah in a higher regard. Rather, one day he wrote a letter to me in which he clearly mentioned that in all matters of creed and in all matters of jurisprudence, then I have taken Shaykh ibn Taymiyyah as a proof, that I have submitted to what he mentions in his books. In another place, he says, Sayyid Sulaiman Nadwi, in this book Hayat Shibli, he says, आखिर में मुझसे फरमाते थे कि मैं अब हर चीज़ में इब्न तैमिया के हाथ पकड़ कर चलने को तैयार हूँ. That he used to say near the end of his life, he wrote to me saying that I have reached a point now that I'm ready to hold the hand of Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah and walk with him in all matters that he has said, showing the great honor, respect and reverence that this foremost Imam of the Hanafis, Shibli Nomani, had for Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah. And Shibli Nomani also started to write a detailed biography of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, but sadly he could not complete it, and he passed away before this could be completed. And we will stop here inshallah and continue with the influence of the movement of Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah and the testimonies of the Hanafis, Ahlul Rai themselves, of the correctness of this movement and the benefits and virtues of this movement, and then move to the movement of Shaykh Islam Muhammad Abdul Wahhab and his influence over the Ahle-Hadith in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, and then the movement of Shaykh Islam Muhammad bin Ali Shawkani, inshallah, in our coming lectures. If there are any questions, then we can address them.
We talked about a lot of instances with Akbar, and one what about Aurangzeb's time, and what was his kind of outlook and position? Was anything mentioned about his opposition or support, or did it become worse in his time?
In comparison to Akbar, then Aurangzeb Alamgir, then he is considered from someone who returned the Muslims back to the religion of Islam, and he negated that which Akbar had innovated from his own religion, Deen-e Ilahi or Deen-e Akbari, that he made obligatory upon the Muslims to follow. So he negated this new religion that Akbar had formed, and he returned the Muslims back to Islam. And he is generally mentioned as being from the righteous rulers who had these efforts in returning the Muslims back in general terms to the revelation of the Quran and the Sunnah. Revelation of the Quran and the Sunnah. But even with this, then he was upon that which is generally found in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, from Tasawwuf, Sufism and extremism to the Hanafi madhab. Under his rule and under his command, the well-known book and the sources of the Hanafi fiqh, Fatawa Alamgiri, that is ascribed to him in the Arabic language, is known as Fatawa Hindiya. It was compiled and collected under his supervision, under his budget, which is a vast resource of the Hanafi madhab of latter Hanafi jurists, that is filled with all types of fanaticism and extremism of the Hanafi madhab, and negating Ahle-Hadith, distorting them and making them in line with the Hanafi madhab. So he was upon general that which the Muslims are upon, but compared to Akbar, then without a doubt, he is considered to be from the righteous rulers who returned and abrogated this newly invented religion and returned them back to the religion of Islam. No.
Shareef, like you said, a lot of these books of Imam Ibn Taymiyyah were published later on by like the Ghaznavi family. So what did they receive? The manuscripts, or did they receive it through like?
Yeah, the books when they're published, then they're published based on manuscripts. So publishing, when publishing started to appear in the last 150, 200 years, then this is the way of rendering and transferring the books from manuscript form to published form. And publishing has went through various stages. First, it used to be published by stone, at-Taba al-Hajariya, upon stones. They used to imprint the text and then publish. And now it has technologically advanced to becoming easy digital publishing, etc. So publishing is to render the manuscripts into published form, and it is based on manuscripts. So the Ghaznavi family, then they received the manuscripts of these books by way of the Najdi scholars, the scholars of the movement from the students of Shaykh Islam Muhammad Abdul Wahab, as will come. And we will mention the close link of the Ghaznavi family with the movement of Shaykh Islam Muhammad Abdul Wahab and the founder of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, King Abdul Aziz Al Saud rahimahullah, inshallah, in a coming lecture. So they received their manuscripts, they copied them from there, and then they made them ready to be published. No.
He was the author of book Al-Fasul Arfin also, right? So in that book there is a lot of wrong things, like for example, wajhud, those kind of things. And like one of the story about his father, that he, after his death, he came in his physical body, and he said that I want to meet my daughter, who was sick actually. He came and then he said there are a lot of women in that room, so like they will see you. So he said, okay, you can put a sheet curtain and then I'll meet her.
Yeah.
He went and meet her, and then his daughter said that I am, fed up of this disease, and he said, inshallah, you will die.
These kind of story, Shah Walillah Dehlawi, then of course we present and judge anyone based on what he passed away on and his latter life.
In the end,
as the Prophet ﷺ, he said, innamal a'malu bil khawatim, that a person's actions are sealed by which he passed away upon his latter life. So Shah Walillah Dehlawi, then he was raised and born in the time of darkness in the Indo-Pak subcontinent, when Sufism and the tariqas of Tasawwuf were prevalent, and fanaticism, extremism to the Hanafi madhab, and ignorance was prevalent. So this was his initial stage. This was his initial stage, the books that he wrote in the initial stage, then we find these mistakes in it. Then he went to another stage in which we find some inclinations towards the methodology of the Salaf Ahle-Hadith, even with some of these mistakes, even though they're lesser, they're fewer. But when he made Hajj and he studied from the scholars of Hijaz, then he returned with this new methodology of the Salaf Ahle-Hadith, and the latter books of Shah Waliullah Dahlawi that we mentioned is clear proof of his final methodology, and that has abrogated, recanted what he was upon from his previous books. So those books, then they have been abrogated by his latter books. And there are several scholars who have went through such stages. Several scholars that have went through some stages, such as Abul Hasan Ash'ari, to whom the Ash'ari madhab is ascribed to, the madhab that is prevalently found amongst the Muslims, the madhab of misguidance, of making ta'wil of the attributes of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala and distorting their meanings. Then he also went through various stages. First he was from the Jahmiyyah, those who negated the attributes of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala in totality. Then he became from the Kullabiyya, in which he affirmed only 7 attributes of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala and then distorted, made ta'wil of the remaining. Then he died upon returning to the creed of the Salaf Ahle-Hadith, and he authored his final books, Al-Ibana and others. So the Ash'aris today, they follow him in his second stage of life, when he was upon the Kullabi, the belief of the Kullabiyya, affirming 7 attributes and then distorting the meanings of the remaining attributes. And we, the Ahlul-Hadith, the Salaf, then he is from our scholars who died upon the creed of the Salaf Ahlul-Hadith in his third and final stage. So this is something, the progression that occurs. Shibli Nomani, we just mentioned, he was staunch Hanafi. Then he had vastness in his thinking. He got influenced by Shaykh Islam Taymiyyah, but sadly his intellect led him to deviate further, and he died upon rejecting the authority of the Sunnah. So there's both scholars who have passed away upon the creed of the Salaf, and scholars who have were or close to correctness, then they deviated, waliyadu billah. No.
Between Ibn Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah, I mean, Ibn Qayyim is known, for a lot of books on al-Aqaid and things like that, but he also seems to write extremely influential and important books in methodology and fiqh. Is that correct? I mean, does he have...
just one book of Imam Ibn al-Qayyim is enough. I'lam al-Muwaqqi'in of Imam Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, it is enough as proof of his methodology of being upon the Ahl-Hadith and openly calling to it and defending it. This book is one of the greatest books that has been authored upon the methodology of Ahl-Hadith, unconditionally and restrictively following the Sunnah, giving precedence to it and refuting taqleed, blind following and madhahib. It is one of the greatest books that has been authored in this topic, and it is a foremost source in this topic. It has been translated into Urdu, English and several languages. So this book enough is a proof for Imam Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah's firm methodology in this matter, that he is from the foremost students of Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah in these matters. Now, we'll end the session here inshallah and continue with our class next week. بإذن الله والله تعالى أعلم وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا.
وذكر فإن الذكرى تنفع المؤمنين وما خلقت الجن والإنس إلا ليعبدون.